Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about today. When you guys looked at your 5 sedimentary rocks, right? You had shale, you had breccia. Okay, that's the way that you pronounce that. It's called breccia. You had sandstone, you have conglomerate, and then you finally have limestone. What do you notice about all 5 of them? What did all 5 of those have in common? They had layers. What else? They had sand particles, okay? The reason why we call them sedimentary rocks because that's actually what they're made of. They're made out of sediments. Well, what is a sediment?
Layers and layers built up of rocks.
No, that's a rock. What is a sediment?
Sand.
Sand is definitely a part of a sediment.
Like grind it down.
Grind it down, okay? Grind it down. Not if they're a full down mineral state, although some sediments can get down to their mineral level. But when we think about sediments, really, it's just small pieces of rock. Alright, so when we look at sediments, it's just small pieces of rock that have been weathered away. Now, one of the things I really want you to understand here, that sedimentary rocks are rocks that are formed from all the pieces of all a bunch of other rocks. And then there's a process by which we actually go through and create the rock. So first of all, we got to start off with something called a parent rock. Okay, so this is going to be your parent rock. Because just like your parents gave birth to you, one type of rock will give birth to another type of rock. Alright, so that's what I call it the parent rock. And then that parent rock has to be weathered. And then those small pieces that get weathered away, either by chemical or physical weathering, are then transported. Okay, they're eroded away. Which there's actually a difference between weathering and erosion. Weathering is actually the physical or chemical interaction taking place, and then the erosion is when those pieces finally move away from the parent rock. And then we have transport, in which it's moved far away, and then after transport we have deposition and lithification. So these are the 4 steps here to creating rock or to creating sedimentary rock. So all 5 of your sedimentary rocks, in fact all sedimentary rocks, are formed from the same process. You had to have weathering, erosion and transport, deposition, and lithification. So we're going to look at each one of these steps in more detail today. And so the first one I want to talk about is weathering. And you guys should remember that there are 2 types of weathering, right? This is something you should have learned in middle school. We have 2 types of weathering. One is chemical, and one is physical. What's the difference?
Chemical is done by like acid rain or whatever.
Perfect. Okay, so we actually have to have a chemical reaction taking place. Alright, so a perfect example of that would be acid rain. And a lot of times your groundwater is actually slightly acidic. So groundwater erodes or dissolves limestone. And so that's a perfect example of chemical weathering. What about physical weathering? What's taking place in physical weathering?
Is it like when they grind down, like beside each other? Is that it? Like say like you have 2 rocks,
Yeah.
and they're like really close together, and after like just normal movements of like basic weight function and everything, and they grind down.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of think of it as you have to have some type of physical interaction taking place. All right, it's a physical movement. So basically, the pieces are colliding. So we definitely have collisions. You guys ever heard of the freeze-thaw cycle? Okay, who can explain that to me?
Is that what freeze thaw?
Not really.
That's where rainwater gets into the crevices of the rocks and
Okay.
it freezes over time, which creates the ice crystals, and then they thaw out and wear down on the rock.
What's the problem though when the water freezes? What happens with water when it freezes?
It expands.
It expands, and then that is a physical weathering. So you have all this water down in these small little pore spaces, and then when it expands, it breaks the rock apart. Okay, so that's the freeze-thaw cycle. So that's an example of physical weathering.
That is kind of
What about floods? When we have flash floods, is that physical weathering or chemical weathering?
physical.
Again, physical, right? Because you got particles within the water that are literally scraping along the rock. Okay. Same thing with glaciation, right? We saw a couple videos on that before, where they had the striations on the rock from the glaciers rubbing past it. Okay, that's another form of physical weathering. So in most cases, most of our weathering is actually done through physical weathering. Tuesday. Oh, sorry, Wednesday afternoon. Why was that such a special day? What happened Wednesday? Power went out. Why did power go out? The wind. Okay, now how many guys went out walking in that wind that day?
I was.
Did you find anything?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I was standing across the street and literally was like sandblasted by all the dirt coming off the construction site. Okay, that's a perfect example of physical weathering, where that wind is actually taking up the sand particles, and then they actually act like these small little abrasions, and they collide with the other rock. You get enough of that happening, and you can start wearing away at the rock.
The track crash this Wednesday means I got cut in the legs by a few leaves.
Good.
Hey, that's not good. We were
Now, guys, when those sediments are formed, we call them clastic sediments. Not classic, but clastic. Now, with classic sediments, we classify them based on their sizes. And all classic sediments are basically, again, the pieces of rock. That's all they are. And we can get them in very big or very small. I want you guys to go to section 6.1 in your textbook.
Okay.
Section 6.1 in your textbook, and I want you to fill out this table.
Peel of rock.
Pieces of rock. Pieces of rock. Alright, so guys, if you look at the table in 6.1, this is the exact table that's in the book. Anything greater than 256 millimeters is considered to be a boulder. Now, what type of rocks typically create boulders? Okay, guys, this is the table. It's right there in your book. Look for it in section 6.1. Brandon? Gravel, right? So, when we look at that, right? So we have gravel, which could be boulders, right? So we have our boulder right here. Then the next one underneath that's a cobblestone. And then the next one is called a pebble. Now, when we look at all these all form one type of rock called a conglomerate. Right, so you can imagine when we think about boulders, right, we're talking about really big rocks. But scientifically, when we think about the boulders, anything greater than 256 millimeters in diameter. Now, what's important about that, 256 millimeters, it's not that big, that's a quarter of a meter. Okay, so if we have this, it's basically 26 centimeters. So I guess that would be kind of a big rock. So this would be the diameter. We would call that a boulder.
Wait, that little section that you're holding, or that section?
Anything this size or bigger is a boulder. Okay? So that's what we consider to be a boulder. Anything between 26 and 64 millimeters. So 64 millimeters is basically about here. So anything in that size range we would call a cobblestone. And then anything between here and here we would call a pebble. So pebbles are actually quite large. scientifically, okay? The next size after that, we call what? Sand. So sand isn't normally, when you and I think about sand, we think about, that normal brown sand, very small particles, but sand comes in a lot of different colors, a lot of different minerals. So sand is loosely, basically any particle between 2 and 0.062 millimeters. And the stone that those sand particles create is called sandstone.
Yeah.
All right, after sandstone we have silt. And silt creates what? Siltstone.
Oh.
Yeah, another name for siltstone? Shale.
This is mudstone or shale.
Oh, okay, so I got that one. Alright, so cool.
Jeez.
Alright, and then the mud, alright, basically in this case clay. Clay creates the shale.
Yeah, that's funny because you can't ever make sand in the mud.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, if you erode it, but I mean, I feel like you add water to